All right, thank you, everyone. I would like to take a moment to introduce my partners in crime in terms of studying materials in African art. Casey Mallinckrodt first. Casey is an objects conservator who is currently working on the Andrew Mellon Foundation funded conservation initiative in African art at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. This project aligns with Casey's primary interest in the stewardship of material cultural heritage and the relationship between the knowledge of the materials and retention and repopulation of historical knowledge. Her current research focus is the significance of specific wood species in the creation of power objects in the historic arts of Africa and the impacts of overharvesting and punitive deforestation in colonial and post-colonial periods. Casey received a master's degree from the UCLA Getty program in the conservation of archaeological and ethnographic materials. This presentation will be co-presented by Ashley Duhrkoop, a curatorial associate for African art. Ashley specializes in 20th century art and also African art. She holds an MA in critical and curatorial studies from Columbia University and a BA in art history from Bard College. Prior to relocating to Richmond, Ashley held curatorial positions at the Dia Foundation for the Arts and at Art in Buildings in New York City. Their presentation is Life and or Afterlife, African Power Figures in Western Museums. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you so much, Jen, and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And I hope it's equally so to work the... there we go. Yes. So we're over the first hurdle. As Jen said, Ashley and I are part of the team of conservators and curators working on this 3-year Mellon grant. And I'm going to give you a summary introduction to the project, and then Ashley is going to speak on the more subtle aspects of it. We're examining several different types of objects, but an important focus has been on ritual objects, figures that were able to impact the lives of people in the communities of their belief systems, and objects that have been removed from that context under many different and difficult, complex circumstances. This project is by design a conservator-curator partnership and has included ongoing consultations with visiting curators, scientists like Jen Mass, conservators, and scholars, and included travel for research and to build partnerships with museums that have related collections. This and other projects, including others funded by the Mellon Foundation, are focusing attention and investing money to increase the body of knowledge about African material culture in U.S. and European museums in order to repopulate lost histories and engage issues specific to the conservation and stewardship, exhibition and presentation of African material culture. These considerations, of course, relate to cultural heritage broadly. Important research has been done and published, particularly in the last few decades, but there's a relative dearth of technical information about materials and methods of manufacture and the integration of that information generated through conservation research into the scholarship. Conservators carrying out technical analyses are expected to use refined technologies to produce unambiguous results, and there's a lot at stake in accuracy. Retaining evidence, possible source codes, correcting and preventing incorrect narratives, guiding treatment decisions, including stabilization that may dramatically change the originally intended arc of an object's active life, and establishing or questioning the authenticity that may have significant legal ramifications, notably as requests for repatriation are being recognized and acted on. The grant has provided funds to purchase analytic equipment and invest in training and engage consultants, including Jen, to carry out more complex analysis than we're able to do in the lab and to aid us in evaluating our results. We partnered with various research labs, including at the Virginia Commonwealth University and Medical School. The most engaging of those has been with the mass spectrometry proteomics lab to analyze proteinaceous materials to determine the type and identify the source species. I think it's relevant to point out that my colleagues and I are conservators, not conservation scientists. And that speaks to the importance of the collaborations. But also I want to add that we work to a model that's, I think, been established by conservators of material culture, of ethnographic collections, whose work has already and long involved diagnosis to seek collaboration, to integrate scholarly and scientific understanding and complicated histories and living communities for which these objects are immediately and historically meaningful. Conservators are aware that any action can change an object, but with cultural heritage, there's an imperative to protect what we don't know is there, and often to protect what isn't there materially. And with analytic technologies capable of extracting highly resolved material identification, the stewardship of privileged, secret information gains added refinement. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about three objects that have been part of the work we've been doing. This is a Songhay community in Kishi of the Eke people, or community. In Kishi have a protective role and are empowered by added materials and actions. The steps of examination, X-ray, UV imaging, and infrared spectroscopy led to having peptide sequencing done of the spongy material embedded in the navel, hips, and shoulders. The results were analyzed against the UniPro database using a search algorithm optimized for proteomics. The scaffolding result, the analytic results found the strongest match, a strong match with bone, but it identified the American mastodon that's been extinct for 11 million years and was endemic to North America. This is a problematic result of the sort that could generate some truly terrible scholarship, but exemplifies the challenges conservators may encounter in building transdisciplinary partnerships. It has led to a deepened collaboration with Dr. Christina Nelson, who heads the lab, to identify and to test different protocols for sample preparation and curating the database search parameters. And together we're preparing a paper on this for an upcoming conservation conference. Though these results will be reanalyzed, bovine or canine bone are more viable results. Although Dunja Herzog, a scholar who's written extensively on Songhay material culture, predicted human bone, a result that would have engaged significant ethical issues. But all the information we're generating requires comparison and speaks to the need for more studies, more comparison with other studies. And to this end, we're working with conservators at the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam and the Fowler Museum of UCLA, investigating Songhay and Kishi and other ritual objects. And of note, the Fowler has recently received a similarly focused Mellon Foundation grant. Ingenue is a powerful water spirit who can influence prosperity and fertility. I'll touch on 3 points of interest from, 3 points of interest from our work: the discovery of new information, consultation with the source community, and the stabilization treatment. Because of paint losses, we were able to observe otherwise hidden elliptical areas on the back and the right arm. X-rays show that there are carved out spaces containing fibrous materials and dense fragments, but also reveal a previously unknown feature, that the eyes were excavated and filled with a dense material that's penetrated by horizontal slits, obscured now by paint. Our former colleague, now curator of African art at the New Orleans Art Museum, Ndi Ezoluwomba, who is Nigerian, did field work on these and other details we generated. But he primarily encountered antagonism to the historic belief systems and fear of repercussions because of the pressure from the Catholic Church that's very powerful in this region. He found some pockets of traditional knowledge in rural areas, and as well as their appreciation for our interest, but no information about the secrets of the figure. The imperative and the challenges to creating these collaborations is old news to conservators and curators of many cultural heritage collections. And stabilization, deactivating the active material. The white paint is essentially unbound and was, to some extent, still is actively unstable. But it was not intended to persist. The figure was beautified, it was repainted before it was presented by its caretakers to adherents for veneration, evident in successive layers of paint and different types of paint over the figure: clay, kaolinite, and white lead. Prior to acquisition, much of the paint had flaked off and some of it had been wiped off. The treatment has tried to curtail any further losses and stabilize the appearance as a sort of snapshot of its moment of acquisition, but alien to the way in its other life it was ever intended to be viewed. It has not, on the other hand, been stripped to abstraction by the removal of the paint or reanimated by imitative paint, and both have been and continue to be done to collections of material culture in Western museums. On the other hand, we have chosen to leave our ingenue in the bardo. Ashley and I have been studying a Boccio, a Vodun power figure from Benin. Ashley's research and the unusually rich provenance of this object have guided the examination. I'm going to give an abbreviated overview of the figure and the analysis done to ground some of Ashley's later discussion, and I'm going to use some of the images that are now on exhibit with the object in the museum for public information. The underlying form is a carved wood Janus figure to which objects, materials, and substances have been applied to transform the assembly into a presence that is active. Objects and substances continue to be added and accumulated over the course of its use life. This accumulation has resulted in a unified appearance, but it makes difficult to observe the component parts. The thick black coating on the head, upper body, and some attachments is primarily blood. Under magnification, the samples appear to be mixtures that include kaolinite, ultramarine blue, plant fibers, often feather fragments, quartz, and iron oxide. Peptide sequencing determined that the sample is comprised of goat blood, though other types of blood, chicken and human, may be present. There are small splatters and accretions of blue powder over the figure consistent with known Vodun practice. Laundry bluing was reported to have been used, and in the mid-late 20th century may have been made of Prussian blue, ultramarine, synthetic dyes, and an earlier period indigo. Infrared spectroscopy and microscopic analysis of the samples was consistent with ultramarine blue, although I may not have found other things that were present. White washes and accretions are consistent with kaolinite using infrared spectroscopy, microscopy, and X-ray diffraction spectroscopy. Samples of unprocessed kaolinite provided by the geology lab at the Africa Museum Tervuren, formerly the Royal Museum for Central Africa, have provided very useful comparisons. There are accretions of reddish heterogeneous iron-rich soils, as well as starch grains that may remain from libations that may have been food that was chewed or spit on the figure during use. And now moving from the inside out, the wood appears to be consistent with Melicia excelsa, a rocco that's known to have been used in these figures. The underlying form is outlined to the right. Unanimated forms can be purchased in the markets. Plant fibers are held vertically on the sides of the figure with twisted plant stems. Strips of leather, each with a black coating, hang from the shoulder around the figure and are bound in place with white cotton. There's a stylized blade, a hevioso, inserted under the cord. 2 pieces of red cotton commercial textile cover the shoulder, and cowrie shells, bells, whistles, keychains, locks and keys, and containers, gourds, and commercially manufactured glass bottles are tied to the leather strips or placed or hung on the figure. This summary is intended to give you a largely unambiguous presentation of the Boccio and its manufacture, and Ashley is going to address our work from a different angle. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey, for those unambiguous results of technical analyses. I will now turn our attention to some of the paradoxes that ensue from knowledge of that information. Consider this Pandora's box of sorts. Most people would probably feel violated if they caught someone peering inside. On the other hand, perhaps you are one of the more inquisitive types who can't resist peering inside the drawers and doors of the sanctified space of someone else's bathroom. Medical records are handled with the utmost confidentiality, or at least that's the expectation. I'd like to share some thoughts with you on curiosity and secrecy and how these two conditions might relate to the source code of power figures in the arts of Africa. Things unseen have an aesthetics and politics. Secrets are powerful. Power figures, that convenient Western term, applied to figural virtual objects to replace the outmoded fetish, locate their power in secrecy. Power figures pose another paradox for Western museums. How should the active ritual life of an object that is processual, ephemeral, unfinished, be preserved and presented in its life or possibly afterlife in the museum? The Sangye Nkishi is a container for holding potent medicines, which, when activated, protects individuals, families, or communities from various ills. The medicines or ritual substances and offerings are typically applied through an animal horn inserted into the head, which you can see there, or into the concave cavity in the stomach, empowering these objects as vehicles for controlling life forces. There are two basic types: large figures for use by the community, like this one, and small figures that are privately owned. In their source communities, Sangye Mankishi have an active life, much in the same way as prescription medicine has a shelf life. However, there is an important distinction to be made between a community Mankishi, as the one seen on the left, and a personal Mankishi in terms of their ritual or active lifespans. Village Mankishi are often treasured and maintained for several generations as guardians of community well-being. Personal power figures are largely anonymous and transient, with periodic short-term lifespans. Once a specific problem, such as an illness or sterility, was overcome, the piece could be deactivated and discarded, much like an empty pill bottle. Can secrecy be a source code? As I pondered the title of this panel, I was led to the visual language of secrecy, found in so many examples of the historic arts of Africa and well developed in the literature. Of course, secrecy is paramount to the group of power figures under analysis in our project at VMFA. Consider the bone that Casey found in the stomach cavity of our community in Kishi. Testing the contents was in itself an act of opening Pandora's box. As Casey mentioned, had this been human remains, we would have had another set of questions to address. Across Africa, in art and philosophy, secrets comprise a key strategy in both secular and ritual experience, from traditional education to divination practices. Secrecy involves paradox. For a secret to be realized, someone must conceal something and someone else must know or suspect its concealment. The import of a secret may remain hidden, but the act of concealment must be revealed if the secret is to have an audience and therefore a social existence. Furthermore, secrets imply that their own disclosure and knowledge are desired, and therein lies their power. Secrecy, marked by the properties of both concealment and revelation, is a force critical to the power of the three figures that Casey introduced through materials analysis. However, secrecy does not function in the same way in all three of these figures. I will very briefly take you through the visual grammar of secrecy. African art signifies a secret according to a visual grammar made up of devices that include coding, obscurity, containment, and accumulation. Secrets are often encoded through the graphic systems of design and pattern, such as irregularities in geometric scheme, or through abstractions of naturalistic motifs. Raphia cloths made by the Kuba people in Democratic Republic of Congo codify secrets in their bold geometric forms. Made by women, these textiles combine the signs of esoteric knowledge with personal invention. Intentionally obscuring information through cover of darkness or inscrutable forms is an important mode of preserving the power of the unseen. Among the Bamana people of Mali, the Como Secret Society is responsible for protecting traditional knowledge and harnessing the power of Nyama to aid the community in all aspects of life. A powerful emblem of the Como Society is the boli seen here, an enigmatic object that is deliberately obscure in form, composed of layers of organic materials. The Bamana word for obscurity is dibi, which refers to literal darkness as well as to the concepts of obscurity, ambiguity, and power. The boli harnesses the power of dibi through sacrificial offerings by initiates of the Como Association, which constantly renew and thicken the surface. The ingenue figure's power materials are contained within the figure itself, hidden inside previously unknown cavities. While ingenue priests and few worshippers may be privy to the existence of these cavities, we only discovered their presence through X-radiography, which allowed us to see beyond the surface of the object. A heavy application of white paint conceals the incisions of the carved cavities to the naked eye. In contrast, secrecy is visibly present on the complex and tangled surface of the Boccio figure. The Boccio boldly declares its secrets in the many accumulated and unknown materials that enshroud the wooden figure within. This presents a paradox. The content of the materials is guarded, but their existence is flaunted. By design, no one but the diviner will ever know the true identity and meaning of all of the complex mixtures of materials applied to this figure, an instrument used as a communicating vessel between our world and Vodun deities. Accumulative objects are charged with medicines that reflect secret or specialized knowledge. While the assemblage might seem random or disarrayed, to the initiated, the accumulative object is an intentional combination of signifying forms. All of these devices are related by ambiguity, the seeming opposite of the project of materials analysis that was outlined by Casey. Art historians, too, have many methodological tools for interpreting an artwork's secret meaning: iconography, semiotics, psychology, and other discourses to discover kernels of insight in which the work's truth is rooted. We have added technical art history and conservation science to our methodological toolbox. I will now take you through a deeper analysis of the Boccio figure. This Janusform ritual figure is part of the material culture of Vodun, a belief in mysterious forces that govern the world and the lives of those residing in it. Boccio are figural sculptures to which empowered materials are added. They are found in a multiplicity of forms, as seen here, often combining a diversity of natural and man-made materials in reference to the chaos, incongruity, and disorder of everyday life. The term Boccio literally means empowered cadaver in Fongbay, the lingua franca of southern Benin where this object was collected. The word Boccio breaks down into two component parts. The word bo refers to empowerment objects, which can include anything from soap to woven textiles to animal or plant parts, and cho, which means corpse, literally breathing life into death and bringing the forces of the other world to bear on the lives of the living. So here's an example of a Boccio, and this is a bow, a personal bow. Personal bow are often worn by their owners for protection from malevolent forces. There are some immediately recognizable signifying forms on VMFA's Boccio figure. For example, the curved blade seen here is the ritual axe of Hevioso, god of thunder and lightning. The iron gongs seen here belong to Gu, the god of war, technology, and metallurgy. Less obvious to the naked eye is the red cotton cloth that's wrapped around the figure's shoulder. Through Casey's technical analyses, she was able to determine that the material under the heavy layers of incrustation is red cotton cloth. The color red relates it to another Vodun deity, Sagbada, god of the earth. Association with these deities activates the figure with a spiritual energy. In addition to its association with the earth god Sagbada, the cloth plays an indexical role in empowering the figure, meaning that the particular cloth might have been selected because it had been worn in life by a particular individual, thus retaining his or her body dirt and odor. Cloth that was used to cover the face of a cadaver is sometimes used to call an individual spirit through the Boccio as intermediary. Materials analysis has provided the unambiguous results of red cotton cloth. Cotton, too, has metaphorical meaning. As a generally imported material, it is associated with value and status. However, there is no technical analysis that can be performed which will provide the personal identity that was possibly related to this particular piece of cloth. What's the more powerful information? The more potent source code. The wood that the core figure is carved from also bears indexical or metaphoric significance. The Iroko tree, which is favored for its medicinal and spiritual connections. Acts of nature can also guide the selection process. Wood from a tree that has been struck by lightning might be chosen for its connection to Hevioso. So this is a sorcery Boccio that's used in problem-solving mental illness. And VMFA's Boccio declares its secret in two ways: through the gourds and the bottles sutured to the figure that might have had medicinal powders and other materials inside of them, which we can see the residue of in some of the bottles, as well as through the padlocks, which contain the literal secrets of the patients that have been spoken into them. Boccio are activated through assemblage, speech, saliva, heat, and sacrificial offerings. The bottles, gourds, and cloth are all forms of attachment. Once activated, it would have been a communicating vessel. The Vodansi, or ritual specialist, would have used the whistles to call the deities associated with the figure. Padlocks are also used as a mode of communication. When the lock is open, the figure is listening to the client's call for help or problem, and closing the lock seals the pact. The figure now holds their secrets. The blue present on the figure is believed to have activated the figure during consultation with a client, while the white kaolin is said to calm the figure or deactivate it between uses. Due to the collecting practices associated with the removal of much African art from the continent, especially during the colonial period, as well as the veil of secrecy that shrouds the market as dealers try to protect their sources, provenance is often incomplete. Until recently, the known provenance of VMFA's Boccio figure ended with the dealer from whom we purchased it. My provenance research revealed the identity of the couple who field collected the work in Benin in the spring of 2001. Through contact with the collectors and research in their archive of field notes, I learned the name of the Vodansi who owned the figure and the village in which he lived. They documented the desacralization process of the figure to prepare it for sale and the conditions surrounding the owner's decision to sell the figure. The Vodansi had inherited the figure from his father, who is also a healer. While healers are paid for their work, they often do not earn enough money to cover unexpected expenses. According to the collector's field notes, this healer in particular decided to sell the figure in order to purchase a bicycle. However, he would only release the figure after he collected all of the necessary ingredients to activate a new one and completed a desacralization process, which included incantations and animal sacrifice. The collectors did not witness the desacralization. In this transaction, the use value of the object becomes exchange value. Through scientific analysis, including UV imaging, X-radiography, XRF, FTIR, PLM, LCMS, peptide sequencing and analysis, XRD, we've come up with a somewhat clinical, species-specific list of materials. But a Vodansi might say it is made of the river, lightning, shadows, desire, fire, and death itself. We can work backwards through materials analysis in quest of reasons for their use and best practices for their preservation, but we will never fill out the complete source code. Secrecy makes sure of that. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. We have time for a quick question before we go into the panel discussion. Yes, Marcus.
Are the secrets decodifiable by another practitioner? Will somebody else who is a practitioner be able to understand what is in the bottles? What are the power materials? And on what radius, what geographical radius?
Well, that would be possible in theory, but most Vodansis actually, they gain their social currency and compete with each other by using very different materials and trying to find different, more exotic materials. That's sort of how they can compete. And actually, Vodun practitioners actually see people from all over the continent because they are said to have the most diverse ingredients and things. So while it's possible that another diviner or healer could give an understanding to some of these materials, they might not be able to identify or say why every single material will be used. And also, through the accumulative process, it's almost impossible to identify every single different material that went into this object over its lifespan.
My question was not exactly that. It would not be accessing somebody who can explain it to us, but is there a language, codified set that there's less to interpretation and they would say, oh, this is what does this, or is there a grammar of these materials? It's codified and shared across a vast radius.
Yes, with different personal invention. Yes.
All right, thank you both so much. We'll continue during the panel discussion.